So today I wanted to talk about the Wildfire build for Elemental Shaman for Mythic Plus in Season 1 of Dragonflight. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it with the talents. This is my favorite version of the build. There are a couple of variations that we will discuss, but this is my favorite way that it's built. I feel like this is the easiest one to get a grasp of, and it's very flexible with how you do it. So let's kind of talk about what the Wildfire build, what's the goal of this build. So the main point is spreading your flame shocks around, getting the bonus from your primordial wave with splintered elements, giving you that huge haste buff when you spread out your flame shocks really wide, then use your primordial wave and get that huge burst of haste. That's going to be really useful, especially in these low, if you're doing like low keys in Mythic Plus, especially like early on in the season when people are still like learning routes, but things are dying really quickly. That's really useful to get that big burst of haste. We're also going to be using our liquid magma totem to also help with our spreading our flame shocks around. And the other big part is the Skybreaker's Fiery Demise, and this is going to be lowering the cooldown of our fire elemental, and this will allow our flame shocks to not only hit harder, and it will be a big source of your damage, but it'll also get that fire elemental back off cooldown quicker. So those are kind of the core elements of it. There's a couple things that we can change around, but just in general, this is kind of the basic play style. So with the idea of this flame shock spreading will basically be, there's a couple different ways you can do it, but if there are 6 targets present and you can get this set up, it's not too difficult, especially with the liquid magma totem. I'll do it right here real quick, really slowly. I won't put down the fire elemental just to keep it on, keep it off cooldown for right now. But basically what you can do is you can flame shock one target, drop your liquid magma totem on 3 somewhere else, use your primordial wave, and then another flame shock, and now you've got 6 lava bursts going off at once. So that's one way to set it up if you have 6 targets present, where you can kind of spread it out. And just to kind of highlight that in a more practical sense, because this is not a great place to show that, we're going to go real quick to the footage I have just to kind of show it in a more practical sense. Okay, so here we have the first pull of Algathar's Academy. In general, what you want to be doing is dropping a fire elemental first, but because I did this on heroic because I was already done with my mythic zeros, we're just focusing on the spread. So in a normal sense, when things aren't going to be dying instantly, you want to go ahead and get that fire elemental down when these mobs are actually a challenge. But right now, just focus on the way that I'm doing the spread for like a pull like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is target a mob in the back here. That's going to be my flame shock target. So I've got my first flame shock. That puts that on cooldown, so that can go ahead and start charging up for the next time that I use it. The next thing I'm going to do is drop my liquid magma totem right on this first grouping away from that first flame shock target, so we don't have to worry about it overlapping, because liquid magma totem will overwrite other flame shocks. It doesn't apply it to things that are that don't have it. It will just, whatever's closest, it will apply it to. So it can overlap that first flame shock. So that's why you want to make sure that one is at the very least away from where you're dropping your liquid magma totem. So you're going to be dropping that liquid magma totem on that first 3 right here. So now I've got 4 flame shocks out. The next thing I'm going to be doing is using my primordial wave. So my primordial wave hits that target. There's a little bit of a travel time, so that's 5. And then lastly, I'll be doing one more flame shock. It's coming off cooldown now. And flame shock on the last one. Now that's the full 6 targets. From here, we're going to use the lava burst to activate that haste. So now we've got 6 lava bursts coming out, hitting all 6 targets. And then I can go right into dropping that earthquake and then starting my normal rotation from here. That's basically what it kind of looks like. Obviously, with the fire elemental, that will make the flame shocks last longer. In a pull like that, it wouldn't have mattered, but you kind of get the idea of how you're spreading out these flame shocks every pull. So yeah, just so you can kind of visualize it a little bit better, that's how that's going to look. Obviously, those things died like really, really quickly. But in Mythic Plus, they'll last a little bit longer. You'll be able to get more chain lightnings out from there. So that's kind of the general playstyle of how you're going to be doing that spreading of the flame shocks. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the variations that you can do, because you can be pretty creative if you want to be, but there's really only 2 main builds that have really been passed around the Shaman community. So we can talk about those now. One is switching Surge of Power to Aftershock. You can do this if this is a little bit more straightforward to you. That's totally fine, especially with Liquid Magma Totem. I would still suggest Surge of Power over it, just because of the flexibility it gives you, because it helps you spread those flame shocks outside of your Liquid Magma Totem a little bit easier. After you drop that Earthquake, you can then apply Flame Shock to 2 targets if they're close enough. Or if you're in single target, it's really buffing up that Lightning Bolt, which is really important in single target because it still hits hard. We're not losing any of our power for our Lightning Bolt in this build. Even though it's a fire build, we're not really losing that power that Lightning Bolt gives you. It's still a very strong hitting ability, especially when you can guarantee those overloads. So you're also, with Surge of Power, still getting that extra, that additional target with Chain Lightning. So there's a whole bunch of different things that Surge of Power can do here that can help if you're using it correctly. You're not always going to be using the Surge of Power buff. Sometimes there's going to be situations where you're going to be Chain Lightning and not hitting a 6 target on like 5 targets or even 4 targets. You're still going to be wanting to use that Chain Lightning. But it just gives you that flexibility. Aftershock's a lot easier to play with. You just get to drop extra Earthquakes or use extra Earth Shocks. So that might be a little bit more straightforward, but in my personal opinion, I much prefer using Surge of Power. Another thing you can do is you can switch out Liquid Magma Totem for Primal Elementalist. Personally, I don't really feel like that gives you enough way to spread your Flame Shocks. It's still a fine build that way. Your Elemental is going to be up a lot, so getting that 80% more damage from that Elemental is still going to be helpful. So keep that in mind as well. Because we're not extending the duration of your Primal Elemental anymore like you were in Shadowlands, there's no, like, it doesn't last any longer than 30 seconds. It does mean that you're going to be getting more uses of like Meteor that you get from using the Primal Elemental, which still hits pretty hard as well. If you want to play it that way, you can. My biggest concern with this is that if you're using Primal Elementalist, you are kind of forced into using Surge of Power because that's going to be your primary way of spreading those Flame Shocks to then be getting your Elemental back off cooldown. So just keep that in mind. I personally, just because of the whole goal of the build is spreading those Flame Shocks, I much prefer using Liquid Magma Totem. But just something to think about there. And finally, one other thing we can do is switch out Eye of the Storm for Power of the Maelstrom. I've seen it in both builds, or in both versions of it, and I've seen other people use it one way or the other. I don't know which one's more powerful. The one nice thing about Eye of the Storm is that it allows you to drop 2 Earthquakes back to back. And you know that you'll do that if you've capped your Maelstrom from like your Stormkeeper or something like that, or when you do get all those lava bursts out on 6 targets or something like that. When you're hitting that wall immediately of getting to 100 Maelstrom, you can kind of just go boom, boom, and drop those Earthquakes. Especially with Aftershock, it flows really well in that sense. With Surge of Power, it can be kind of weird regardless, just because sometimes you're going to be wanting to drop an Earthquake and then get a Chain Lightning in, and then maybe drop another Earthquake, just to make sure that you're using your Surge of Power buff. But just keep that in mind as well, that both of these can be good. Power of the Maelstrom, while not good in like a lightning-based build, in this fire-based build where we're going to be casting a lot of lava bursts, you're going to be getting this proc fairly often, and an extra elemental overload on either a lightning bolt or chain lightning for that matter is a lot of damage, especially for those chain lightning overloads. They can really help you kind of like solidify your damage and just really get you that extra bit, as well as get you more Maelstrom to be dropping more Earthquakes as well. So yeah, those are kind of the main things that we can do to change up the build. There's other things you can do too. If you want to, you can mess around with maybe even putting a second point in Echo Chamber and another point in Mountains Will Fall. This in general with using Primordial Surge is basically what I use for doing world content as it is. But it's probably not quite as powerful as Skybreaker's Fiery Demise. So just keep that in mind. There are other things you can do. Mess around with it, have some fun. This build just is a lot of fun to play with. I'm not sure about the power level, though. That will be the one thing that we'll have to see as we go into Season 1 of Dragonflight. So keep that in mind. With that, let's go ahead and talk about the class tree a little bit. Coming over to the class tree, one thing about this build that's a little unfortunate is because we're using, or if we use the Liquid Magma Totem version, which again, I prefer, you are kind of incentivized to then use Totemic Recall and its child node, Call of the Elements. So what this allows you to do is whenever you use this, it will reset the cooldown of your most recently used totem with a base cooldown of shorter than 3 minutes. Liquid Magma Totem is a 1 minute cooldown, so it will reset Liquid Magma Totem. So this will really help line up your Liquid Magma Totem with your windows for your primordial waves, so you can get those to line up more often. There's some other ways you can use it too, but that's the way that has felt the best from a practical sense in Mythic Plus, is to maybe not, you're not trying to worry about putting Liquid Magma Totem down and then immediately resetting it. Plus, Totemic Recall has it's on the GCD, so you don't really want to use a GCD in the middle of combat that does absolutely nothing. And putting 2 Liquid Magma Totems down at the same time is just really not that beneficial when you have so many other ways of spreading your Flame Shock in this build. So I would not suggest using it for that. I would suggest it more for making sure it lines up with your primordial wave, so you can get those spreads more often quickly, especially in these low keys. If you're going to be doing low keys or things are just going to be dying really quickly, this will help you get those Flame Shocks applied quickly so you can actually do some damage as well. But because Liquid Magma Totem is a 1 minute cooldown and Primordial Wave is a 45-second cooldown that's being reduced by rolling magma, it's just something that will help keep it in line more often, so you can on demand have Liquid Magma Totem up when you need to. But you do need to keep in mind that Totemic Recall will reset the most recently used totem. So if you put down a Liquid Magma Totem and then put down a stun totem, it's going to reset the stun totem. So just keep that in mind. Right now, you just kind of have to keep this in your head. What was the last totem you used? Sometimes you might even want to go ahead and use Totemic Recall in combat just so you know that you're resetting the correct totem, especially if you know coming up you're about to go into a pack where you're going to want to make sure that's on cooldown, or make sure it's off cooldown. You want to make sure that Liquid Magma Totem is off cooldown. So just keep that in mind as well. But yeah, that is kind of unfortunate we're having to go so far down on this right side, because it does make it kind of a squeeze to come down and grab Ancestral Guidance on the left side. Some people don't like the idea of a Elemental Shaman healing in Mythic Plus, or just any DPS for that matter, healing in a Mythic Plus, but Ancestral Guidance is a very, very, very powerful cooldown. It can really help stabilize your group in like really rough situations, or when your healer's struggling, you can really help shoulder some of that burden. And it's a 2 minute cooldown, so you're kind of getting it pretty quickly and pretty often. So in your burst windows with your Stormkeepers and with your Flame Shock spreads and everything, this can be a great way to help keep your group up and kind of supplement some healing as well. It'll be good in all builds. It's just going to be a little bit harder to get there when you're grabbing Totemic Recall and Call of the Elements. It doesn't give you too much to play around with. As you can see, it's kind of thin in the middle here. We're not getting our Brimming with Life or anything like that, but we can move some other points. We can move Static Charge if you're in a stun heavy group. We could maybe even get rid of Graceful Spirit. So you do have some wiggle room here, a little bit, not a whole lot, but just keep that in mind. At the very worst, if you're feeling like you need to bring more utility, you can cut it, but it's kind of hurting the build at that point. So you can do it. You do have enough points to grab everything. Losing thunderstorms has been kind of a big deal, at least in my experience. Having that on-demand knockback is really good for Mythic Plus, but yeah, this is basically how this build would work, with some variations with, like, say, Primal Elementalist or Aftershock, or these two here in the middle. So yeah, that's basically it. That's basically how it's going to play. I kind of like glossed over it because I was so focused on how the build actually plays, but really don't forget about your Stormkeeper. I did in that clip just to focus on the Flame Shock, but you're still going to be getting a lot of damage from your Chain Lightnings. Don't turn this into just a spam Lava Burst and hope for the best. You will be able to fish if you want to. If you like the gambling aspect of this build, you can gamble because of deeply rooted elements. You can gamble to try to get those Lava Bursts to proc you into an Ascendance, which will then cast Flame Shock, or not Flame Shocks, but it will then cast Lava Burst on all your targets that have Flame Shock. So you can get really lucky with this and have like the fireworks going off. But you really do have to get lucky with that. That's really up to you. In general, this is still a Chain Lightning spec for the most part. When you get down to like 3, maybe 4 targets, you can really start gambling with the Lava Burst. But just don't forget that a lot of your damage is still going to be coming from that Chain Lightning, and keeping that Flame Shocks rolling as well. And one last thing I almost forgot, when you do proc those Ascendance windows with Deeply Rooted Elements, if it's still mass AoE, you still want to be going into that Chain Lightning. You don't need to just be forcing Lava Burst out. You can go right back to Chain Lightning, but this time it'll be Lava Beam. In previous expansions, Lava Beam has been very undertuned or not worth using when you're in Ascendance. But this expansion, Lava Beam is doing much, much more damage. There's even a build centered around this. So don't be afraid to, if you proc that Ascendance, to use Lava Beam. One thing to look out for if this happens, when you're using Lava Beam in Ascendance, make sure that it fits within the window of Ascendance. Because if the window of Ascendance expires while you're casting Lava Beam, it will cancel the cast of Lava Beam because you can't cast it outside of Ascendance. It won't flip over back to Chain Lightning. So in a perfect world, what you'd want to do is, if you know that you can't fit in another Chain Lightning or another Lava Beam, you would want to go ahead and cancel the Ascendance, and then go right back into Chain Lightning. I'm not going to mess with that. You can always move. You can always cast a Lava Burst. But just keep that in mind, that it will cancel the cast of Lava Beam if Ascendance expires while you're casting Lava Beam. But it does do a lot of damage. Don't be afraid to use Lava Beam when those Ascendance windows proc. Obviously, in single target, you're just going to be hammering home those Lava Bursts. But it's now very good in AoE too, so that's one more thing to look out for. But that should just about cover all the main spots of questions that I've seen a lot of. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Another great source, or the main great source that I would suggest, is going to the Shaman Discord. The Shaman Discord is going to be linked in the description of this video. Lots of smart guys in there. Also the Icy-Veins guides, which is run by Stormy, I believe, and then the Wowhead guide, which is by Hawk Corrigan. Both of those, if you're interested in Elemental Shaman and the other builds, feel free to look at those. Those guys do amazing work. Those guys are the real geniuses to these specs, as well as everyone else who's the mods and MVPs in the Shaman Discord. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to help. But also you can check out the Shaman Discord as well. So that's just about it. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I stream on Twitch TV at twitch.tv/Ridmark. Give me a follow there, check me out. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much.